of Criminal Justice in New York City. She was awarded she was awarded National and College Dean's List for 2005 and 2007. Dr. Grandison was also one of the alumni honoree featured in 50 at 50, celebrating 50 years of alumni success in John Jay College. Dr. Grandison also volunteers as a medical officer with the Barbados Defense Force Field Medical Team. She is the first vice president of the Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners, where she sits on the BAMP COVID-19 Task Force, as well as the National Pharmacovigilance. She is an international corresponding member in the National Association of Medical Examiners. This evening, I present to you none other than Dr. Adanna Grandison. Go right ahead. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. Thank you very much, Mrs. Patrick, for inviting me to have this session with you guys this evening. I thought it would be important that for this session where we are talking about the COVID-19, the virus, the vaccines that we have, any variants that are out there, and certainly beyond what is on the horizon, I thought it would be important that instead of having the regular PowerPoint conversation, I thought it would probably be better to have a heart-to-heart conversation, most importantly, answering any questions that you may have. So please feel free to interrupt me at any time to ask any questions. I'll try to monitor the chat as well to see if there are any questions, but Marlon or any of the hostesses, please feel free to just stop, intervene, and ask me any questions as you see fit. So essentially, SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus associated with COVID-19, where its head really in Wuhan, China, everyone knows by now, back in 2019, given rise to this disease process, which we now know as COVID. All right. COVID is essentially a disease process that affects most organs within the body, predominantly the lungs. That is why generally persons tend to have symptoms such as shortness of breath. But as I said before, it can affect any of the organs. We have noticed that we have seen presentations, several different presentations of COVID, ranging from stroke in the young to persons who become hypoxic and develop what we call ARDS, or acute respiratory disease syndrome, which is essentially absolute damage to the lungs, which usually is not reversible, and as well as many other derangements in other organ systems. Now, what are some of the symptoms of COVID? So some of the symptoms of COVID range from persons who will be asymptomatic or have no detectable clinical symptoms. So you feel quite normal, okay, to persons who will have symptoms including shortness of breath, cough, headache, fever. Also, you can get vomiting and nausea, diarrhea. So our first question coming in is, what is hypoxic? So hypoxia is the medical term that we use for when you are low on oxygen. So we generally breathe in air, which is a mixture of oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and a few other things. But we expect that a person will have a certain amount of oxygen in circulation to make the organs and the cells within the body feel quite comfortable. When that demand is really not met, a person will have too low oxygen supplies in circulation, and they will start to feel quite uncomfortable. And the first symptom that they generally notice is shortness of breath. Persons can also end up experiencing faster breathing than normal in an attempt for the body to try to compensate for the fact that they're not getting as much oxygen as they usually would. I hope I've answered your question, Antonia. Yes?
Yes.
Good, excellent. So as I was saying, so those are some of the symptoms that you can have with COVID. Okay, but why is it that essentially COVID affects the body? I like to think of the virus essentially as almost close to a parasite. It does not have any ability to make additional copies or replicas. If you're thinking about it like in the family structure, you have mommy and daddy who's able to make babies, and then you have the family expanding. A virus can't do that on its own. It requires a host to actually hijack essentially its machinery within the body, within the cells of the body specifically, to make additional copies of that virus, okay? And that is why the virus requires us. So I say all of that. I'm going to explain first how that happens, but I want to make the point right at this point that if the virus does not have a host, or it does not have access to humans, it can't replicate, okay? So how does that work? So the virus enters through your nose, or your mouth, or your eyes, and essentially it replicates or multiplies in that space because there's cells in that space. How does it enter the cell? I'm sure by now everyone has heard about what we now know as the spike protein. So this is almost like a little finger-like projection that's on the outside of the cell wall, and it functions almost like a key. It opens our cells via what we call an ACE2 receptor that's on our cells. Big fancy term. Is just another entry point. See it like a door, okay? So it enters the cell from that point, and then it goes into our cell and it steals the machinery that we have that helps us to regenerate and continue to make more cells to ensure that, for instance, our skin look good, and you know, our liver cells are regenerating and we stay nice and healthy. It's actually hijacking that same very machinery to attempt to make a copy of itself. And as it makes more and more copies of itself, what we call the viral load will increase within the person, and the person will feel sick. Okay. Now, our body's response is to recognize something that is foreign. So our body generally will not attack itself unless, for instance, some person has a condition or what we know as an autoimmune condition where we can attack ourselves. But generally speaking, our body will not attack its own cells. But what it will do is that if it recognizes that there's anything called non-self or foreign, it will go ahead and attempt to kill it. I like to explain it like, for instance, a police officer that has seen a guy that has just come out through the window of a house after committing a crime, and he nabs him. Doesn't really know who he is. He just has seen that he's committed a crime. He takes him down to the police station and he says, "What's your name?" And the guy says, "Not talking. I have nothing to say. I don't know anything." And he gives the police officer a very difficult time in an attempt to be able to identify this criminal. Now, the criminal has no obligation to speak to the police, but the police has every single duty to figure out exactly who this criminal is. See our body as the police officers in the police station. So what do? They take pictures, they take fingerprints, and they run it through their database to see, does he match any of the criminals that they have in their database? Same thing our body does. It takes a look at the cell. It actually looks at the components on whatever it is that's foreign that comes into the actual system. And it attempts to compare it with things that we may have been exposed to as we were growing up. If we don't recognize what is present currently in the body then has to figure out something. How do I best get rid of this? And so we have some cells known as our white blood cells that almost act like bouncers in the body, right? And their job is when they find somebody who does not belong in the system or something that doesn't belong in the system, to either corner them off or just go in and kill them. Or there are a few of them who literally go in and will act almost like a suicide bomber and kill themselves to kill the person. Okay, that's generally how our cells work. And so the first response that we have is what we call an innate response. And in medicine, an innate response is a very non-specialized. So it's not specific to the particular virus. It just recognizes something foreign. And it says, okay, well, I'm going to try to control the situation and start to attempt to kill whatever is in the space. This generally is not very, very effective. It won't do a targeted job. So I see those almost like your normal police force. Okay, again, the guys in the police station. But if you had a very specialized job, you might not want to call in the police force. You might want to call in SWAT. You might want to call in task force. You might want to call in a specialized unit who they have the guys that actually do things very, very strategically and specifically targeting some person that you don't want in the space. In our system, we call that the adaptive immune response. And so it's now providing a very specialized task of killing something that does not belong there. So after about 7 or so days, right, providing that the virus, whatever that foreign virus is, does not take over the human body, your body should start to recognize whatever foreign entity it is. It has passed it through the database. It has sent it to any neighboring countries, whatever the case is, to figure out exactly who this criminal is. And then it goes, aha, we found him, no problem. And then it goes back into the room and say, yes, Mr. John, we now know it's you and you're going to be charged, and you continue to apply the charges as you see fit. That's what your body is supposed to do. So that's how the immune system works. Now, the danger with that is that everybody's immune system does not work as it's supposed to. And there are some persons who what we call have a weakened immune system or are considered immune suppressed. Who are those persons? Persons generally who do not have well-controlled high blood pressure, or what we call in medicine hypertension. A person who has poorly controlled diabetes, or what we call in Barbados blood sugar. A person who is obese or too big, too heavy for their height. Okay, certainly we also have persons who may have chronic conditions that are communicable, for instance, like HIV or AIDS. AIDS is on the spectrum. If you do not treat your HIV and make sure to keep your viral levels down, you can then have manifestation of, again, the disease process, which is AIDS. Or you may just be some person, for instance, who may have a very weakened respiratory system or a weakened kidney system. So you hear about a lot of persons that have chronic kidney disease. And those are the persons whose kidneys aren't really functioning as nicely as they should. So they need the assistance of something like dialysis, or they may have to cut out certain foods, not drink as much water. So any person that has an what we call an immunocompromised or immunosuppressed state, even persons like with cancer, for instance, or persons that are on chemotherapy drugs, any of those persons are at not increased risk of catching COVID, but they're at increased risk that if they get COVID, that same immune system that is supposed to identify the criminal and go in and attack it does not attack it as nicely and as quickly as it should. And so the virus has the ability to come in, multiply, and instead of having, let's say, 4, if we get very simplistic, so it came in as 1 virus particle, and after a few hours, let's say it had like 4 or 16. Now with a person who's immunosuppressed and they can't mount an immune response to really kill that virus, the virus continues to multiply. So by the time we get around to trying to help that person may have, let's say, 254 virus particles in circulation. Now, certainly with more virus in the circulation, it will have the opportunity to attack more organs. And more organs means more stress on your body. And when you have more stress on your body, then it's extremely difficult for your body to mount the response to try to get better. So that is why we encourage persons, for instance, to do a few things to minimize the possibility of them even getting the virus to begin with. First thing that you should do is we want to encourage you to wash your hands. Now, how do you wash your hands? I know a lot of persons just get a little soap and water and they go like this very quickly and rinse it off. That's not how we want you to wash your hands. We want you to take some soap, make sure you get a really nice thick lather, a lather that you can see, and you're going to interlock your fingers, and you should probably start singing the happy birthday song. That's a really good song that you can use because it helps you to remember how long you should be washing your hands for. So you're going to interlock your fingers inside, then you do the outsides on both sides. Don't forget the thumbs, because a lot of persons forget the thumbs. We also tend to forget the blade of our hands, okay? Then we have the actual palm of the hand. So you wash the palm of the hand, okay? And then we also want to make sure and cover those knuckles quite nicely, because if you wash the inside like this, you didn't get to touch the knuckles, right? So you want to make sure and cover the knuckles very nicely. And then the last part, which almost everybody forgets, is around the wrist. And once you've done that, your happy birthday song should be finished, okay? And then you rinse your hands. And again, once you rinse your hands, you're going to make sure that nice thick lather that you had is now gone, okay? The second thing that you should do is wear a mask. I'm going to just pause one quick second so that I can show you exactly how to put on a mask. So here I have what we call a KN95 mask. Now there are very many different types of masks that you can wear, but all masks generally have the same principle. They're supposed to protect you from having any of the droplets, what we call in Bajan terms, saliva or golf balls, right? The virus travels on those golf balls that we always talk about when we were in primary school. And so they can hit you. It's like if you were sitting in class and teacher was talking, sometimes you would be getting a few of those same golf balls hitting you as teacher was speaking. But so what we want to do is make sure and trap those particles, okay? So that who's speaking to you, you don't get any of them touching you. And certainly you don't pass them on to anyone. So how do you put on your mask? And what constitutes a proper fitting mask? Because that's the most important part. So you need to first have a mask that's fitting your face quite nicely. I have a KN95 because I tend to deal with persons in medical settings where my exposure is a lot higher, okay? But you don't necessarily need to use a KN95. You can also use a surgical mask. So you put the mask onto your face, okay? And I should take a step back. Make sure and check your mask. Make sure there are no holes in your mask. There are no spaces in your mask. I see some people actually, the attachment for the mask has come out and they now have looped it back through and tied a knot, but there's a hole right at the point where the actual piece came out. That's a mask that needs to go into the garbage because you're not protecting yourself. So the first thing you want to do is ensure that the metal band is at the top of the mask over your nose bridge. It's not supposed to be like this under your chin. It's supposed to be over your nose. Okay, you put the mask onto your face and you take the straps and you can place the straps over your head. So my first strap goes over in line just above my ears and it's nice and fixed already at this point in time. The second strap, this one actually tore, so I'll change this. So if, for instance, this here happens, this is not a mask to use. And so these are some of the things that you should see, okay? You take out the second mask, you inspect it again, and you take your first mask, you take your mask, you put it on your face, and you put the straps over your head, the first one, and then you take the second one, and you place it down under your neck. Now this mask that I have on, the straps actually go on around the head. There are some persons that have straps that go around the ears, but it's not really where the straps go that's important. It's how the mask actually fits you. So your mask should actually be fitting you above your nose, right? And a lot of people tend to pick up the mask at the top and squeeze it together. That's not really what you want to do, because remember, you don't want any air, any golf balls, anything coming into under your mask. So you take the mask and you just smooth it along your face. And then you make sure that the bottom of the mask is actually fitting nice and tight. Now, a good way to check to see if your mask is working properly. Can you see that as I'm talking, I'm breathing, my mask is moving in and out very nicely? Can you see that? That means you have a good seal. The other way that you can check is to just exhale, blow. And if you can feel any air touching your hands, then you know there's a breach in your mask. And so you always want to ensure that you don't have a breach in your mask, because when you're around persons, if they talk and they have COVID, guess where the COVID is going to go? Wherever the air is allowing to come in. So if you have any pockets on the side of your mask, then the COVID can get behind the mask and get into your nose, your mouth, and even your eyes. Okay, good. So that's your mask. So you put on your mask, and this is how you take your mask off. And when you get home, you chuck the mask into the garbage. So that's mask wearing, then hand washing. Now, when you are out in public, how do you conduct yourself in terms of how far do you stay away from a person? So you want 2 arms length. So if you stretch out your arm and you ask the other person to stretch out their arm, that's approximately 6 feet. That's how far you want to stay away from someone. And the reason for that is that even if I had golf balls coming out and I had lots of COVID coming out of my mouth via my saliva, in approximately 6 feet, the majority of those particles will fall to the ground. Okay. And so after 6 feet, it's essentially quite safe for you to be standing there, even if you had probably a little breach in your mask, that you are essentially safe. Okay. The other thing that we should all practice, and this is even inside the house, is practicing respiratory hygiene. So there are a lot of persons who you will see prior to COVID, they will be out and they go, achoo, and they don't cover their hands, or they would cough and they would cough into their hands, and then all the bugs are in their hands. But what we encourage you to do is actually have a tissue, and you can cough into your tissue, or you can sneeze into your tissue, and then afterwards, what do? You go wash your hands. Okay, so those are some of the things that you can do from what we call a non-pharmaceutical perspective to essentially protect yourself against COVID-19. Now, there are some other measures that you can take. For instance, it brings us to the second part of the presentation, which we know as vaccines. So really, what is the purpose of a vaccine? The purpose of a vaccine is to provide you with some protection so that not necessarily that you don't get infected. There are some vaccines that prevent infection, period. But at the very least, prevents symptomatic disease and severe symptomatic disease. What does all that big medical jargon mean? So we want that even if you were supposed to get exposed, so there was some person around you, person cough or sneeze, or even just spoke, or you were out at church and the person started to sing and the person had COVID, and all that COVID went via some of your respiratory droplets out into circulation, that you did not get exposed to COVID. That's the first thing. So we want to minimize exposure. But let's say we can't minimize that exposure, and some of those respiratory droplets and COVID virus particles went into your nose. Do you want to get sick? The answer to that is no. Right? So what you want to ensure that you do is not allow the virus to either replicate, or even if it does replicate, that it then does not affect your body. So there are generally 2 types of vaccines or inoculations that we have used historically. The first type is what we call an IgA-based inoculation. We tend to see this here associated more so with the seasonal flu inoculation, and it comes as a nasal spray. And the reason that a lot of persons, especially persons within the military, they use the IgA inoculation formulation for seasonal flu is because they don't even want to allow the virus to be even able to replicate in the back of your nose, like where COVID or SARS-CoV-2 really replicates. Okay, so the majority of the vaccines, or all of the vaccines, I should say rather, so far that are on the market are what we know as IgM type vaccines. They go into your shoulder, all right, and IgG. So what do? They actually prevent any virus particles that travel down the back of your nose, down the back of your throat, and what some persons may appreciate if they had a bit of a sinus drip. You know, you would hear a person go all the time, or they may even cough, and they say, I can feel as if I have a tap running in the back of my throat. Those are particles and saliva and mucus and whatever respiratory bug you have that goes from in the what we call the upper respiratory tract down into your lungs. Once it gets there, it then really starts to do the job that it wants to do, which is attack the lungs, which is the primary space that SARS-CoV-2 attacks. Now, the vaccines that we have available to us protect that. Even if those particles were supposed to get down the back of the throat and into the lungs, they wouldn't cause any problems. And that's what we really want to ensure at the very least. Because how does SARS-CoV-2 cause death? Essentially, it infects the lungs. It causes the lungs to become overwhelmed. So you just don't have a normal cold or flu. You then get what we call a pneumonia. And it's not a pneumonia in one part of the lung, it's a pneumonia all over the lung. So the entire lung field is involved. And then the person can't breathe properly. They get very, very short of breath. And no matter how much amount of oxygen we attempt to give the person, because all the bugs are in the space, there's lots of mucus and lots of gunk down there, it's very, very difficult to allow for the person to continue to breathe and get oxygen in and get nutrients to the rest of the body. No oxygen in, no nutrients to the rest of the body. Okay, so that's why we want to keep those very precious lungs protected. And we do that via the vaccine. So here in Barbados, we have 3 vaccines available. We have the AstraZeneca vaccine, we have the Sinopharm vaccine, and we have the Pfizer vaccine. Now I'll start with the first one we had on the island, which is the AstraZeneca vaccine. So the AstraZeneca vaccine is a viral, what we call a viral vector vaccine. So what they have done is they've taken the genetic information that actually codes for that same key that I spoke to you about before, which is the spike protein, and they package it in what we know as a covirus, and most importantly, an inactivated covirus, or what we know as adenovirus in medicine. Now, why would you put it in something like the adenovirus? Now, persons can be exposed to adenovirus. The body recognizes adenovirus as being something foreign quite quickly, and it will attempt to get rid of it. But most importantly, we know for sure that adenovirus is one of the viruses that can get into our body, right? And can get into our cells. So we take that, essentially that empty shell with this different information inside of it, which is the spike protein. We package it quite nicely and we put that into your arm. And once it goes into your arm, the adenovirus attempts to enter your cells. And then once the packaged material that has in the information to make the spike protein, that is released. And it sends a message to your body, because your body, remember, has the machinery. It sends a message to your body saying, hey, I need you to make more of these little keys because I need you to be able to get into the cell. Now, when your body sees all these little keys all of a sudden turned up in circulation, it goes, wait, hold on. I didn't make those keys. Those keys don't belong to me. And so the next step that your body does is to bring out the troops, bring out the police, bring out SWAT, bring out BDF, bring out everybody to try to kill all of these keys essentially in circulation that do not belong. And so in doing that, apart from killing them off, they then take one single key or so back to the base and they essentially interrogate him and say, tell me everything that you know. And they try to get as much information out of that key, and they store it. They put pictures all up. So we know, if you see this red key come through, he's somebody that we have to get rid of. If you see anybody that looks like him, we get rid of him. So that if the real virus comes through in circulation, the body goes, we saw him before. We know what he's about. We're going to kill him. And they send in the troops even faster to kill him. And that's the purpose of any vaccine, to recognize foreign faster, to kill it quickly and get it out of circulation before it has the opportunity to replicate. So that's how AstraZeneca works. Then we have Sinopharm. So the Sinopharm vaccine is essentially a combination of the virus that 3 persons had before. And these persons are out of Wuhan, China as well. And the 3 different variants of the virus have been placed into essentially an envelope. And that envelope, again, you're exposed, you replicate, you make more of those copies of it to say, here's the key again. And the body notices the key and then it starts to kill it. The third vaccine, which is the Pfizer vaccine, is a little different. The third vaccine now has specifically what we know as mRNA. What does mRNA stand for? It's your messenger RNA, or the messenger ribonucleic acid. Big fancy term for what I would like to call a whisperer. It's like a person or an entity, I should say, not a person because it's not a human, but an entity who can share a message and instruct your cell to do a specific job, okay? So this mRNA is packaging what everybody's so caught up with, the nanoparticle, but really, what is that nanoparticle? It's fat, okay? It's fat. And why is it fat? Why would we want to inject fat into our body? Well, in our body, we have what we know as a lipid bilayer membrane. And that's how our body takes something from one side over to the other. It's almost like a boat that crosses a canal or a body of water, right? So we take that whisperer and we put him in a little boat, okay, so that he can get from one side of the island or one side of the whichever deserted space you have him into another area, which is from outside the cell to inside the cell. All right. So you take that mRNA, you package it in fat, and it goes across and it enters the cell. And when it gets into the cell, what does this mRNA tell the cell to do? It goes in there, it says, hey, I need you to make me as many copies, let's say about 5 or so copies of this red key. Again, what is that red key? The spike protein. And the body makes a few copies of that spike protein, and those spike proteins are now expressed or are attached to the outside of the cell that has made it. And your body goes, hold on, I thought that was my cell just now. Well, clearly it isn't. That is actually now something that has red sprinkles on the top or red keys on the top, something foreign, and your body attacks it. And again, SWAT, everybody comes in, attacks those few cells that has the red spikes on it. And when the real virus comes into the space, which has all of the other things in it that make you feel ill and make you feel nauseous and give you the headache and all that stuff, then your body is able to attack it a lot faster. So that's generally how vaccines work. Now, some persons may say, but Doc, why is it that I still feel a little sick after I've gotten my vaccine? And that is because your body recognizes it as foreign. So your body attempts to mount the troops. Now, if you have lots of persons running down a pathway, you probably would be generating a lot of heat from all those persons running. Same thing, if you have lots of cells running to the space, to essentially those bunkers to kill off whatever virus is in the space or whatever appears to be non-self, which is the vaccine, the contents of the vaccine, you're going to get warm, you're going to get hot, and you recognize that as a fever. If it is that, for instance, the same thing happens and it continues to happen centrally, what occurs is because the body is recognizing we need to send in more troops, we need to send in more troops. Our body does a very fascinating thing in that it relaxes our blood vessels so that more troops will get in quickly. When that happens, if it happens in the head, you get a headache. Okay, when the vessels dilate, you get a headache. Now, the other symptoms that some persons may get is a little tenderness at the site. And that is part of our inflammatory response. If something happens in our body that's not supposed to occur, our body wants you to know. So what happens? You get pain, you get redness, you get swelling, all the things that you may notice after you've gotten any vaccine, not just the COVID vaccine. Will we have to get another set of shots like how the flu shot is annual? And this is a question from Tony Best. So at this point in time, so far, the research is actually showing for the AstraZeneca vaccine that there's no need for a booster shot. For the Pfizer vaccine, however, there is consideration for giving a booster dose to persons who may be immunosuppressed, who may not have been able, even after getting both of their shots, may not mount sufficient immune response or be able to send troops out as quickly as possible. So what we want to do is to give you another dose so that your troops respond a little faster. That's really what a booster is. A booster is just there to provide your body with a quick response to anything that is foreign. And this is something that we've done for years. You've gotten booster shots if you've been on the Barbados vaccination schedule. You've gotten booster shots for DPT, which is diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus from the time you have been a few months old. Okay, after you got your first shot, you got a few more of those just to make sure your body is responding properly. You got a booster dose for MMR, which is measles, mumps, and rubella. We now get HIV, which is Haemophilus influenza B, another virus, right? So we are accustomed to getting booster doses. There's nothing strange really about a booster dose. A booster dose is just to ensure that your immune system is as efficient as possible. We don't want to give that virus enough time to be able to multiply to cause a problem. Shepherd, I can't understand your question. Can future generations butt up immunity to it? I'm not understanding your question. You want, pardon?
Yeah, sorry, typo. I was asking if future generations can eventually build up immunity to it, because it's not going anywhere right now. When influenza first started, it was doing what COVID is doing now. Eventually, it got to a point where we could build up some sort of immunity via, I don't know, better.
That's not what happens with the flu. That's not true.
That happens? Okay.
No, so the reason why a lot of persons do not respond to the flu, every single individual, like especially adults, don't respond to the flu as severely as, for instance, a young child, is because you've probably been exposed to the flu as you were growing up. So that is the immunity and the recognition. Remember, I spoke about the fact that after the group kills off the bugs, that they take one person and they go and they interrogate him and they put pictures up and everything. That's what we call a memory response, a memory cell response. And that's generally done by your B and your T cells in your body. So they start to keep a database, if we could call it, of who has come through these walls, who we need to attack, so that if we ever see it again, that we don't have a problem. But every single year, persons die from the flu, right? Just like how there are persons who are dying right now from COVID. And that's because if you are never been exposed to it and your body is unable to mount an adequate response in a sufficient enough time, because remember, the virus's job is to do one thing and one thing only: survive at all costs, even if it means killing you. All right. And that is as real as I can possibly get with it. So the virus wakes up every single morning and it attempts to have a shower, put on its clothes and say, yeah, today we're going to go and we're going to conquer the world. Now, the virus is very regimental in terms of how it does things. So it's not going to get late. It's not going to sleep go stay up late at night watching too much TV. It's not going to do any of those things. It knows it needs to go to bed at, let's say, 8 o'clock. At 8 o'clock, it's going to turn off the TV, go to bed. Every single morning, it's going to get up at 5 o'clock. It's not going to get up at 5 past 5. It's not going to get up at 10 past 5. It's not going to say, oh, dear, it's so sleepy. I can sleep to 8 o'clock. It's not going to do that because it's very regimental in terms of how it behaves, right? And its only job is to replicate. So it's going to enter the cell every single time unless there's something that's stopping it from entering the cell. And it's going to replicate. It's going to make more copies of itself. Why? Because it needs to survive. It needs you to survive. So for instance, if you slack off or you don't do what you're supposed to do, right? You essentially put yourself at increased risk, but you're really helping the virus to do everything that it needs to do, right? Which is to multiply. And then when it gets so much of that volume in circulation, in your circulation, then you start to get the symptoms like the cough. Why do you get the cough? Because your lungs are saying, dear God, please allow some of my lungs to clear so I can breathe properly. So you try to cough out some of that mucus, and then you coughing up that mucus, you also coughing up the virus, and the virus said, yeah, we get to go to somebody else, right? So that's how it's spread. So that's how the virus works. That's how vaccines work. And next thing we go to the variants. So you have several variants in circulation now of SARS-CoV-2. We have the alpha variant, we have the beta variant. Everybody knows about Delta, all right? But really, what is a variant? So a variant is with multiplication. Remember, I told you the virus's sole job is to survive, is to work. Now, for instance, I want to draw an analogy here for you. If you had a person that was very regimental in what they were doing, okay? And let's liken the virus to almost like a serial killer, okay? So the virus is a serial killer. What does a serial killer do? He doesn't just come out and say, oh, you know what, you can just kill any random body. Most serial killers will observe, collect a little bit of data, see how you operate every single day, see what time you go to school, what time you go to work, what time you make up. They take a lot of pictures. You see a lot of this in the movies, right? You see that the whole bedroom has up pictures of the person that the serial killer is very interested in. They get lots of what we call intelligence about that person. That's what the virus does before it attempts to attack. So once it knows every single thing that you do, okay, it knows that Adanna gets up and she gets ready probably around 6 o'clock. And when she leaves her home, she's going to drive up the highway. That's what she does every single morning, right? So if I wanted to catch Adanna, what would I do? Ha! I know what I would do. I would wait for her on the side of the highway because I know she's going to come up the highway. That's a sure way that Adanna is going to go, unless when she gets to a certain point of the highway, there's an accident, she has to divert. But 99.9% of the time, she's going to go up the highway. If I was a serial killer, I would wait for you on the highway, right? That's what the virus does. Now, you are attempting to also fight the virus. That's what your body's trying to do. It doesn't do as good a job as it should because it's not as regimental as the virus is. So you start to see this person scoping you out. You say, hey, I noticed that there's this thing that's sort of watching me all the time. And I noticed that every single time I get to, let's say, the bus or roundabout, there's this one car that's always there, and there's a guy inside the car. He's always taking pictures of me as I pass. And you go, huh, all right. So if you saw this person getting out of the car and coming towards you, you might feel obligated to defend yourself. And you got out, the person got hold of the car more and attempted to attack you. You defended yourself and you were able to get away. And you harmed them, right? But in harming the person, you didn't harm them lethally, but you actually stopped them in the tracks, at least for that day, okay? But the person gets the opportunity to run back into the car, holding their wounds, and they run off. They get back in their vehicle, they drive off really quickly. And you say, I win. I won today. They attempted to get me, but I got them. You feel very smart with yourself. But the virus goes home. It says, she got me today. She got me good. And just like most persons who are usually quite rogue, they probably will stitch up themselves, you know, put in whatever patchwork, put on bandages themselves, and they sit and lie waiting and they heal. And then they come out again. Now, this time they know, well, as let's say Tony or Shepherd or Sonia or even Mrs. Patrick, as they're going down the road, they may attempt to do whatever, let's say it was a stab or whatever the case is, they would attempt to hurt me. So instead of having, let's say, their tummy exposed, they might put on a bulletproof vest, or they might put on some sort of contraction that prevents a knife from going in. So they come down the road and you get by bus roundabout and you see this person in the car waiting on you. As soon as you stop, the person jumps out and comes towards your car again, same as that person. And you go, I'm stabbing you again. And guess what? Person looks at you and go, not today. You did that last time, sweetheart. But today, I have protection against that. And so then it gets into the car and it hurts you, right? Because the virus has modified or changed itself to protect itself. That's exactly what a variant is. It's a mutation that allows for the virus to adapt for better survival. So it's going to do, as I said, it's going to survive at all costs. If it means it needs to put all of the spikes to one side, that's what it's going to do. If it means that the spikes need to get longer, that's what it's going to do. If it means I need to put more spikes on my surface, because if I have more spikes on my surface, then the chances of me binding to a receptor site is a lot higher. That's what I'm going to do. If it means that instead of having 4 prongs in the key, which make the spike, I'm now going to have 5 prongs in the key to make it a sure bet that when I put this key into the door that it opens, or I create a universal key, that's what it's going to do. Because remember, its job is to survive. And that's really what all the variants have been. The alpha variant, as you know, essentially was more contagious. Now we have the very serious variant of concern, which is the Delta variant. Delta variant can be essentially likened to chicken pox. Before, early on, we thought that every single person that's infected with COVID could possibly spread it to 2 or so persons, 1.2 to 2 persons. That's not how Delta is working. Delta is saying when I get someone infected, I'm going to make sure and increase my replication rate a lot faster in that person I've infected, so that when that person talks or they sneeze or they sing, that there's a lot more virus coming out into circulation. So that virus, a person that has Delta, is now able to infect about 5 to 8 persons. Same if you put an alpha person in space, and we put a Delta person in space, and we put other persons around them who are not infected, the person that has Delta can infect a lot more persons in that room than the alpha person. And that's why we're concerned about Delta. Now, there's some other variants that are not of concern, but are of interest. And why are we concerned about a variant of interest? So we get very concerned about variants if they're highly contagious and are infectious, or we get concerned if they have the ability to bypass the vaccine. So see like your vaccine as your cape. Generally, if you have on, you see a lot of superheroes on TV. If you're a superhero, gets extra strength when it puts on a cape, right? Is able to do all these supernatural things. But just like Superman, when Superman comes home and he takes off his cape, he doesn't have those superpowers anymore. So the virus is almost like that for you. It provides you with additional security. It helps you with like almost to have like sensors, so that if the virus attempts to sneak up on you, your body's able to recognize it and kill it off really quickly. Now, if you're not vaccinated, you're just walking around saying, well, I don't think I'm going to get the virus. But the virus is right there behind you, just creeping up really, really quickly. And some person sneezes and it goes, got him now. And you don't have on that cape, you don't have that armor of protection anymore, right? So that's what you really, really want. And the variants of concern or the variants of interest can either, as I said, cause the virus to be more infectious, so it could spread at a faster rate and overwhelm a person, or it can attempt to evade the coverage that a vaccine has provided for a person. Now, the longer we take to have persons vaccinated, it means the longer the virus is out there plotting and saying, okay, so a few of them got vaccinated. can't really tackle them too much and cause too much major problems with them. But you know who I could tackle? I could tackle the persons who don't have those capes on. And it says, but I still want to get the people that got the vaccine. How am I going to do this? I am going to make a change here and a change there. And sometimes those random changes could end up giving rise to something that we don't really want because our body cannot respond to it. So it may be extremely infectious, and it also may completely evade previous vaccines. So that's why you keep seeing in the international newsfear, persons are always checking to see how much vaccine escape did this particular variant have. Is it able to cause as much damage to the body as, for instance, another variant that they had, even to the person who's vaccinated? Now, the comforting thing is that so far, all of the variants that are out have a certain amount of immunity. In terms of, we have a certain amount of immunity against those variants with the vaccine coverage. But we don't know if that is going to be the case if we continue to sit back and wait and not get vaccinated. Because the more time we give the virus, the smarter the virus is getting. So it's either you collect information on the virus or the virus collects information about you as in a population, you as in a species, us human beings. So we need to be very, very careful in terms of what we allow, in terms of how we allow for the virus to collect more data and get smarter around us. So why is it important to, one, get vaccinated? And most importantly, why is it important to follow the measures? Now, you may decide, well, you know what? I'm young, I'm healthy, I'm strong. I don't need to get a vaccine. I have my natural immunity. And that's true. You do have your natural immunity. Remember, your natural immunity takes a few days to be able to identify this new criminal, all right, this new foreign entity. And a few days is all the virus needs really to do what it needs to do in terms of replication to cause deleterious effects, okay? Whereas if you get vaccinated, your body has already stored a copy of something that's strange. So as soon as your body sees it coming in, it says, hold on, I know who that is. I know who that is. And it goes and it kills it. And that's why the research is now showing, for instance, that there are persons who have the vaccine and don't have the vaccine. Even if they get infected, both of them get infected because both of them can. And this here goes back to IgA versus IgG. Even if both of them get infected, we see that the vaccinated person viral load at day 4 starts to fall really rapidly. Whereas at day 4 for the unvaccinated person, their viral load is actually taking off, it's soaring. Virus is just replicating on rapid fire. And that's not what we want, because remember, once you start to get all those particles starting to drain down, it starts to attack the lungs, it starts to attack the other organs, and then it gets to the point where the body becomes overwhelmed. So that's not what we really want. So that is where we are now in terms of why it would be important for you as an individual to get vaccinated. But let's go a little further. We also have persons in society who are unable to vaccinate them, get vaccinations. For instance, a person who's very, very ill, or their immune system is not working so good, right? And so for whatever reason, they're unable because a doctor thinks it might be more harmful for them to get vaccinated than actually beneficial for them. And that's where the whole concept of herd immunity comes in. But herd immunity can only occur if we have enough persons in a population actually vaccinated so that we are the herd who protects them, the few that can't get the vaccine. And right now, we are not there here in Barbados, okay? So that's why it's important that you play your role for yourself, but also you play your role for someone else who can't get the vaccine. But then let's look at why possibly vaccinate in terms of a community. Now, as you know, Barbados imports lots of stuff, okay? We have lots of companies that provide us with a lot of things that we like. We like chicken, we like lots of good, tasty foods that sometimes big companies, Massy, etc., they have to fly in, right? Now, if we have any of those persons as well on the front line, because frontline workers aren't only doctors and nurses and everyone who works in the hospital, frontline workers are also, for instance, your persons who work at the port, your persons who work within your judicial system, so at the courts, the persons who also were even picking up your garbage, they're frontline workers. If all of these collective persons, all the persons, for instance, that help you with getting registered, so for instance, persons at NIS, persons at Town Country Planning, persons at BRA, okay? All of these different persons are the persons who help Barbados to function very, very, very efficiently. Now, if we have a lot of these different organizations, persons within these organizations getting infected, it means that persons now who are infected we have to help them by removing them out of circulation and giving them the treatment that they need. But also all of the persons who were around them at the time that we knew they were infectious, we also have to quarantine them. So what is quarantine? Quarantine is when we take a person out of community and we sort of separate them from the community until we know definitively if that person is truly COVID positive. But guess what? If I have to quarantine you for 5 days, it means it's 5 days that you probably don't get the chicken you want, you don't get the vegetables you want, you don't get the food you want. The fact that you wanted to go and clear that barrel from any port, you can't clear it from any port because the port guys are in quarantine. Or if you had to register something in the courts, you can't do that because the court people may be in quarantine. So it disrupts a lot of your systems that require the proper functioning of your country. Worse yet, what about your emergency services? Like, for instance, police officers, firefighters, right? Ambulance drivers, or EMTs and paramedics, right? You don't want a situation where those persons are not vaccinated and then they have to be quarantined and taken out and you have downtime. So that's why we are trying to avoid that. So what I really would like to remind you guys about is the fact that this virus requires you. You're the person who has the power. Okay, it requires you to replicate, it requires you to survive. And just if we took a whole set of matches and we put them in a line and we struck one match at one end and each of them were close together, you would be able to burn all of the matches from just striking one. But if we move one of those closely set up matches so that there is a space in between two matches, okay, then when the match gets to a point where it has nobody to jump to, the fire dies out. And that's exactly how the virus works, right? So even if it got to the first 4 people and you decided to play your part by social distancing, washing your hands, wearing your mask, staying 6 feet away from people, right? The virus can't get to you. Then you decide on top of that, you know what, I'm gonna put on my kit. I'm gonna get a vaccine. That is what helps you. Right now, we don't have vaccines for children who are less than 12 years, so they are also quite vulnerable. So the older ones need to assist with helping to protect our future generation, right? And that's what we need to do for everybody as a collective, all right? So I'm gonna stop at this point in time to have any questions that you may have. And if you don't have any more questions, I am going to say thank you and good night.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grandison. Anybody else has any more questions? Any country questions? Because you know some people are anti-vaccine. Any of those questions, concerns?
I have a question, but I don't know if you can answer it for me. My daughter has had the Pfizer vaccine. However, the first dose. However, her school is requesting that she gets the hepatitis B vaccine as well before she starts her course. I just want to know how long she needs to wait because she has to get the second dose on the 4th of October. So I want to know how long she has to wait before she can go and get that hepatitis B vaccine safely without it interacting.
So generally the recommendation for any vaccine, if you are given two different vaccines, you either have two options. Because we have not looked, the data really has not looked at inoculating persons with both at the same time, because we do that normally with other things. For instance, as I said before, we give children D, P, T, Hib, Hep B, everything in one, but we give them on the same day at the same time.
Yeah.
So that doesn't cause a problem. But if it is that you have to give the two vaccines spaced, then we like to give them at least 4 weeks apart.
Okay.
All right.
4 weeks. All right. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Dr. Grandison,
Yes,
I
please.
was listening to a presentation. I think it was Sunday. There was this particular emphasis on persons doing all the things to keep their immune system highly charged by taking the vitamin C, the vitamin D, the zinc, the having the 8 hours rest, ensure that you have your adequate amount of water intake and exercise. And that was what was being purported as a alternate solution to vaccination. What are your views?
So I will say that it is important that you keep your body in tip-top shape. Absolutely, right? So you need to make sure that you eat a very healthy diet, that you're going to be getting your vitamin C, your vitamin D, although we have now seen the research showing that vitamin D actually causes no difference in outcome in terms of COVID, right? Your zinc, all of those immune boosters, that's important. But remember, the reason that we have a challenge with this virus is because this virus is like the perfect assassin. It comes in quite quietly. The body doesn't really recognize it when it first gets there. And this is with any foreign entity. And even if it recognized it or noticed that there was something foreign in the space, it still doesn't know how to get rid of it. So you have a good few days before the body is able to mount the appropriate response to kill it, right? Now, the virus, however, is able to get in the body and on day one start replicating. So it's making more virus particles from day one, from the time it gets in, right? And so by the time your body has caught up to say, okay, well, I now recognize that this is SARS-CoV-2, instead of having one person that's ready to take over your body, you have a whole tribe of people coming to attack your body. See it like that, right? So that's the danger in terms of saying, well, I'm just going to use my natural immunity, because your natural immune response takes time to respond, right? Time which you may not have. So by the time you have identified that SARS-CoV-2 and you figure out, okay, well, I need to pop off 2 fingers and whatever in terms of to try to kill it, the virus has about 20 or 400 copies or 5,000 copies or 5 billion copies. And can your body send out enough troops to kill off all of them? The answer to that is no, right? And that is why from the beginning, you need something that is going to peak your immune system, that's going to prime your immune system so that your immune system recognizes it from day one. When it comes in, it's SARS-CoV-2, it's not supposed to be here, kill it, full stop. No, so the vaccine does not cause a mutation in the virus. The virus mutates because it is always trying to be more efficient at what it is doing. Okay, so if you have more persons in population spending longer times not being protected, because remember, the virus requires time to replicate, which is what our natural response would do, okay? If you are not given the virus the opportunity to replicate, it can't survive. If you're not given the virus enough time to replicate, it can't make many copies. If it is not making lots of copies, it can't mutate. Viruses and cancer operate the same way. Cancer is just uncontrolled cellular replication. Big fancy word for there's nobody say stop, don't make any more. It just continues to make more and more copies. And if I pressured you, think about it like, for instance, I asked you to bake 2 sweetbreads. If I ask you to bake 2 sweetbreads and you're accustomed to baking sweetbread, you might make those 2 sweetbreads with what we call in Bajan terms a lot of love in them, right? You make sure that you put in all the cherries and you make sure that the coconut that's in the middle is perfect and the raisins are the correct amount. But if I come back to you and say, listen, I need 450 sweetbreads by tomorrow, you might say, well, Grandison, that is not possible. I can't do that. Or you may say, well, I can attempt to help out Dr. Grandison, and you're going to attempt to make these sweetbreads. But are you going to have the correct measurement? Are you going to make sure that the coconut is placed perfectly down the center? Are you going to make sure you have the right mix of cherries and raisins? No. Some sweetbreads may come out good. Some sweetbreads may come out not so good. Some may come out and they don't have any cuts in the top that got the marks that everybody likes. Some may not. You might remember to put sugar on the top of some. You may not. Really, it's not uniform. And there's a what we call a mutation, right? Now, the virus has been mutating all along. It's just that when we have a lot of mutations that are occurring, some of those mutations can cause clinical significance. When they cause clinical significance, we call it a variant. But if you, for instance, go on GIS aid, the virus is constantly mutating. But are we checking for the ones that don't cause any clinical significance? No, because it really doesn't make any difference to us humans. But from the time it may cause a problem with us, we're interested in it. So no, the vaccine does not cause the mutations to occur. A population that's not protecting itself, that's given the virus time, is what's actually causing the mutations to occur. Everyone has their own opinion, but is there anything more than that we can do to disband the bizarre theories? I think it's important to have sessions just like what we're having right now, a session that gives persons the opportunity to listen in, to ask questions that they may have. A lot of persons are very concerned, certainly, about asking questions to begin with. And it's not just about COVID, it's about anything, because we don't ever want to appear as if, oh, well, I'm not too smart on this topic. But I always tell even my students that I teach, you know, there is no such thing as a foolish question. When we may really demonstrate that we are not doing the smartest things is when we decide to stay silent. We don't ask for clarification on a matter. And then when we are required to make an informed decision, or the best possible decision for you or the best possible decision for your family, you don't have the requisite tools to do it. So I think that at the very core, the very first thing that we really need to start doing is to put the education and the correct, accurate information out there into the space, and allow for everyone to be able to have the opportunity to have that information available so that they can hear. So I think that's very, very important. And also to have ongoing sessions. So it's not really just about having one session where you ask these questions, but if it is that you need to have follow-up sessions, then you do that, right? Where everybody can benefit from it.
I do have a question, Dr. Grandison. You know, when you wear your mask, are you breathing in your same air all the time?
No, so a lot of persons think that you're breathing in your same air, but the mask has a certain amount of porosity to it. So it is not that you are rebreathing your own carbon dioxide. And I'll tell you that that can easily be debunked. Doctors and surgeons wear their masks for hours in theater. This is long before COVID. And we don't see doctors passing out in the middle of a surgery. If that was the case, I guess everybody would be very alarmed because we might be in the middle of taking out an appendix and just keel over, right? It's shut down. And that's not really what happens, right? So the mask is there to allow oxygen and carbon dioxide to get out, but it's also fine enough to trap particles. Now, I can explain the micrometers, but I don't think that that's very, very important at this stage in terms of calling the number. But you can get all the way down to 0.03 micrometers with the mask, right? You don't really necessarily need to know that, but it's we're trying to essentially protect the particles, the saliva particles, and because that's how a lot of persons say, well, the virus is tinier than what the N95 allows, and that's true. But remember, the virus cannot travel unless it has a surfboard. The surfboard is saliva, right? Or the respiratory droplets. So if you have respiratory droplets coming towards the mask, it's going to catch the actual droplets, and the actual respiratory droplet with the virus stays on the outside. And that's why we even encourage you that when you're taking off your mask, don't touch up all the outside of the mask. Or the way you see some person do, take the mask and fold it up and playing it in the hand, and don't do that, because all of the outside of your mask can have the virus on it. Yeah.
That's for the surgical mask, but what about the homemade mask?
So the homemade mask doesn't offer you as much protection. That's why you need to still do the other measures, but you then can also put filters, etc., on the inside of your mask that may assist you with getting a bit more protection. So the more exposure you believe you will have, then you need to protect yourself adequately and appropriately. Okay. I see I have here a question. Last week, I heard a doctor say that COVID is here forever since we cannot get rid of viruses. Example, the flu, measles, etc. This is not me personally speaking, I don't think that we are going to get over COVID anytime soon. Okay. But we are seeing all of these serious and severe effects of COVID because we are like babies to COVID, right? Nobody has seen this one before. No one has been exposed to it before. So again, and this is a classic example of how the human immune system works, right? Because we've never seen it before. You're noticing that there are lots of people getting hurt and lots of people dying because their body has never recognized it before. Now, as your body continues to see it coming around and it says, okay, well, that's it, kill him, get him out. There comes a point in time that your body becomes so efficient because it has been primed, let's say with the vaccine, that your body would kill it and you wouldn't even recognize that you were probably even infected with it. Like what happens with the colds? There's some persons who say, well, I don't get in a cold, like years go by and people just get cold all around me and I don't ever get sick. I might got a little sniffle for a day and then I'm back to normal. And it's because your body has recognized the cold virus. It kills it off. You don't really do too much, you don't get sick, you don't get downtime, and then you go back to normal, right? So yes, it may be around for quite long going forward, but will we have the same response to it? That really depends upon how we handle ourselves.
All right, and there is also this wearing the mask on the flip side. Now we're talking about the surgical mask. That some persons like to walk around with the mask,
the white side out and the pink side and the blue side, right? No, so the waterproofing is actually on the blue side, right? So that is there to protect the person's respiratory droplets from getting to you. Right? That's what you really want to do. You're not really too much interested in your respiratory droplets, although you want to help them as well. But what you're doing is you want to protect you. You are the focus, right? So your blue barrier needs to be on the outside with the metal clip to the top. Okay, now I see also a lot of people do this whole thing with twisting the sides and making sure it has this crisscross and the knots and all that sort of stuff. But I'll say to you, if you look at most of the persons, and you could try it, that are walking around with the mask with the crisscross or the knots tied at the side, and you stand from the side and you look down the side of their mask, most of them you could actually see their lips. Now, if you could see their lips with your naked eye, Imagine what the virus is doing, right? So again, you want to make sure that it's fitting you properly. The blue waterproofing is on the outside to protect you from persons' respiratory droplets getting to you. All right, and make sure that you're wearing it properly. If it is that your mask is so big that you need to be doing all the twisty ties and all that sort of stuff, you need to get a different mask. That's what it means.
Right, and the reason really for bringing that outdoor is that because even although we talk about the mask wearing and all the other stuff, we just leave it at the very layer, and then we see all the not to do and should not do, and nobody really explain that to the public or to persons doing it. And that's something very funny that the education on the precautions managed to lose its purpose or emphasis.
Yeah.
So this thing to come back, Adanna, and let people know that they shouldn't be, creating those spaces that you talk about. So that's so true. You can see the ears and you can see the lips and all the other stuff. And a lot of medical people do it.
Yep. But it is dangerous. All right. So you need to make sure that you're protecting yourself. That is the bottom line. Protect yourself with the mask, protect your hands, protect, make sure if you're sneezing or you're around a person that you have enough space that even if they sneeze or they talk low, that their respiratory droplets fall to the ground and don't get to you. That's the whole point of everything, really.
Excuse me, what about case 2 years and younger?
Pardon?
What about case 2 years and younger? So they catch the virus too? Children 2 years and younger.
Children what age?
2 years.
2 years and younger. So anyone can get exposed to SARS-CoV-2 and anyone can develop COVID, even 2 years and younger. I am assuming you're asking that question in terms of the swabbing testing. Is that why you're asking the question?
Yeah, because sometimes we do a rapid test on my grandkids. We do the swabbing.
Right. So in terms of children 2 years or younger, simply because their anatomy is not fully developed, we generally tend to take a little bit more precaution with them. All right.
Okay.
But if we have to, we would swab them. It's just that we really would leave that to a specialist, a professional, a medical professional, a doctor. Okay. Because we don't want that we end up damaging those very delicate tissues, and because the anatomy is a little different, we want to make sure and keep them safe. For young children, we generally tend not to do a nasopharyngeal swab because children tend to banter about a little bit more. So we tend to use an oropharyngeal swab where we actually ask them to open their mouth, say a nice ah, and we get deep into the back of the mouth where we take that swab.
So don't that it a little more dangerous than if you just swab it from the nose?
Pardon?
By putting it to the back of their throat, is that a little more dangerous than doing it from swabbing your nose?
No. So it's, remember that the nose and the throat are actually connected. It's one continuous tube, right? So once you if you go through your nose and you go to the very back of your nose, you're actually at the top part of your oropharynx or your mouth, right? The back of your mouth, I should say specifically. But there's no additional danger. It just requires that the person is well trained and understands the anatomy.
Okay.
But the swab does not go into, for instance, your brain or anything of the sort. It's literally just going into your upper respiratory tract. That's where we're actually trying to get the sample, because that's where the virus accumulates when you breathe it in, or if you were talking and you laughed, and it went into your mouth, it's going into the back of your throat, right? Or in the back of your nose. It's just like the same space essentially where your sinuses would bother you.
Okay. The reason I asked that there because I heard in news today, I think it was yesterday that in Cuba they're giving in case as far as 2 years the vaccine.
Pardon?
I heard in news yesterday that in Cuba they're giving the case 2 years the vaccine.
Right. So different, remember that different formulations of vaccines, and this is across the board, not just COVID, are formulated for different age groups. Right now, the AstraZeneca vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, and the Sinopharm vaccine have not been approved for children less than 12 years old. But they're actually now starting to do studies in the younger age group. So we try to do it, especially we started doing it in a person who may have had exposure to coronavirus on a whole, because remember, coronavirus is a family of viruses, right? Which the cold virus belongs to. So most adults would have been exposed to coronavirus, the family, probably some distant relative. But we've never been exposed to severe acute respiratory coronavirus 2, that specific one, right? So we know that adults may have been exposed to coronavirus, the family. So a person who's an adult, if they're exposed to a vaccine for that, they will have some sort of response. Whereas a child may not have even experienced corona flu. So we started to dial it back, and we keep dialing it back, looking to make sure that all the time we're ensuring safety. So that's why you're now starting to see the trials are starting to go for the younger age group, the what we call the tweens.
Okay.
I see another question here. Looking on examination of the isolation vaccination report, it appears to me that the partially vaccinated seem to be faring better than the fully vaccinated, with 2% being infected in comparison to 16% being fully vaccinated. Why is that? Now, for me, the question really would be, where are those 2% who are partially vaccinated, right, versus the 16% who are fully vaccinated? Which part of isolation are they in? For instance, if I had a partially vaccinated person, 2% of my population that are partially vaccinated, and both of them were in primary isolation, I wouldn't say they're doing better at all than the 16% that may be in tertiary with no symptoms, right? So I think that that's really the important thing to know. So yes, you may have more persons presenting, because remember, the vaccine right now, because it's not an IgA vaccine, so it's not the one that we inoculate every sniff, like the seasonal flu virus that's going to block you at the nose. It's preventing the actual symptomatology at the level of the lungs. So the fully vaccinated can be infected with the virus just like the unvaccinated. It's just that the unvaccinated and even the partially vaccinated may go on to mount more symptoms that may be deleterious. So for me, I'm really not just looking at the percentages in terms of fully vaccinated, unvaccinated, but I also would want to know, where are those persons presenting in the isolation pattern? Is it that we're seeing? Pardon?
Okay, so we have 13 persons in tertiary, partially vaccinated, and 103 fully vaccinated altogether. We have no persons in primary and no persons in secondary isolation who are partially vaccinated.
Right, so
those 2% is tertiary.
So everybody, both in the fully vaccinated and the partially vaccinated, are in tertiary, correct?
No, because we have primary and secondary persons who are fully vaccinated, but we don't have any primary or secondary isolation, persons in isolation who are partially vaccinated.
And you are seeing that where, so that I can pull it up for everybody so that they can see.
I'm looking at Barbados COVID-19 isolation vaccination report for September the 15th. I have it here in my hand.
No. Is it on the website that we can pull it up? So
I'm looking at it on my phone. You know the daily dashboards?
Right.
That send out now the isolation report.
Right. Let's see if I can find one. Hold on. So just give me one.
So this caught my eye. So I just thought it kind of interesting.
Right. So let's go. I'm seeing the isolation vaccination report for the 15th. Let me see if I can pull that up so we can probably take a look at that together. So I'm going to screen share. Is this what you're looking at?
15th, right, correct. So that's just what I was querying.
Right. So here you have 2 persons in primary isolation, 2 in secondary isolation, and the majority in tertiary, making up your 16%. No persons are partially vaccinated in primary and secondary, and 13 in tertiary, and then the majority being unvaccinated across the board. Now, honestly, I actually don't know. I would be very interested to probably then go on to see these partially vaccinated persons, what type of vaccine they had. Because, for instance, the response across AstraZeneca versus Pfizer, for young adults with AstraZeneca, they tend to mount the majority of their response on the first shot, right? So you hear a lot of persons say, boy, I felt not so good after the first shot on my AstraZeneca. But then when you ask them about their second shot, they're actually fully covered, right? They don't have any symptomatology, which is not quite the same for the Pfizer shot, where they don't really feel anything the first shot, but they may get some symptoms, letting them know that their immune system is working on the second shot. So it would be interesting to know, 1, what type of vaccine they had, and 2, if it is that how long ago they had the vaccine. And something that I think that the entire international community now should be striving to do, which is to check to see truly how much of a response have you had as a person who has been inoculated with the virus, right? I think that's also important, because I'll tell you, there are cases, not with COVID, but we know that has been documented, for instance, with hepatitis B. And I can tell you for sure, because it has happened to me with varicella, where there's some persons who will get the full course of a vaccine. So hepatitis, you get 3 shots. Varicella, which is chickenpox, the general population would get 1 chickenpox shot. Persons in healthcare would get 2. All right, and there are some persons who, even after getting the full course of the vaccine that they're supposed to have, they have not mounted the appropriate immune response. Now, how do you really know if you've mounted the appropriate immune response? You would have to get your titer levels. And that's exactly how I found out that even though I had both of my shots for chickenpox, I really wasn't covered, right? So I then had to go back and get a 3rd shot of varicella. So for me, it would be interesting to find out exactly, is it that these persons are fully vaccinated, those 2 that went into primary and secondary? Is it that they had it according to the schedule? Is it that they mounted the appropriate immune response? Did they end up having, let's say, the second shot and the first shot, the second shot and the virus around the same time? Those are all questions that you would need to ask. So there are lots of confounders in the space that we would need to actually examine. But off the top of my head, I can't say what would be the reason that it appears that they are faring a lot better.
Just I was examining the board and that jumped out at me a whole
Right.
lot. So I thought that I was
it's quite an interesting finding, though, and it's something that I think from a scientific standpoint we should really be looking into.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So we
Another question for you, doctor. You know, like sometimes you get your first vaccine, you'll be okay, and then maybe you get the second one and you're not too well. What's the reason for that?
Right. So remember we spoke about side effects. So you can have side effects across the board for any vaccine, and that is really your body responding to the actual foreign entity that you have. For a lot of persons, especially those who took the Pfizer vaccine, that's what you're describing is the pattern that they usually have, right? They didn't feel too bad on the first one, but the second one, they said, oh gosh, I feel so achy, right? Or they have a bit of a headache, or they had a bit of a fever. And the reason for that is that now your body is recognizing there's something foreign, and it's mounting a very significant response to it. So that's the reason why you are actually having those symptoms.
Pardon?
That
was really my daughter, though. I have the Pfizer, but I have both, and it didn't do me anything.
Right. So for old, not saying that you're old, for persons of advanced age, right? What we've noticed is that both AstraZeneca and Pfizer, they tend not to have as robust a symptomatology pattern as a younger immune system, right? But it doesn't mean that they're not getting covered, because they are, because we did. But in the study that was actually done, specifically, I can tell you for the AstraZeneca vaccine, what they did is that they looked at the young versus the older population, and they found that the younger population, they had more robust symptomatology, but both of them in the end ended up having the same coverage and mounting the same response as across both the groups.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we have any more questions? If so, we can do that quickly. Okay, no more questions? All right, I don't hear any more. Thank you so much, Dr. Grandison. We enjoyed it, and I think the one-to-one, I guess, I don't know if anybody had any more personal questions, but certainly the one-to-one, it's important that we ask the questions and we find out more. And I really enjoyed the details of the different vaccines. I think from my point of view, AstraZeneca is pretty good. From what I've been pushing the Pfizer, but based on your explanation, I think, hey, AstraZeneca seemed all right to me.
All of them are actually very good, to be quite honest with you. All of them are quite effective. And so I'm happy to tell you that, but I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I want to say thank you to everybody.
Okay, right. So thanks so much for spending the time. Thank you, Marlene, as well, for asking Dr. Grandison. The research and the detail was really, really helpful. And I'm sure if we have any more questions or any more queries, we certainly can pass them on through Marlene so that we can get clarification. So I know there's lots of theories out there, lots of confusion, and you need to really find out for yourself what is the truth. And there's nothing wrong with researching and asking yourself questions, but we do have a brotherly obligation, because there's some people who cannot take the vaccine, and we need to really consider them as well. So thanks so much. And we're going to ask Cara Samuel, how was it today for you? Because this is a younger group. How was it?
It was good.
It was good. This Samuel?
That's Cara.
That's Cara. Okay. Samuel, what is your thoughts?
It was good.
And Adeline, you were interested in it, or it didn't interest you? She's a 4-year-old.
Huh?
How was it, Adeline?
You have to say my stuff. Good. How was good?
Okay. Karen, can you dismiss us in prayer this evening, please?
Dear Lord, please forgive us for our sins. And dear Lord, please make sure keep the coronavirus under control. And please protect us during the weekend and help back to school be an easy start. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Wonderful. Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you, doctor. And do stay protected and continue to do a great work.
And you too, everybody. Please stay
Okay,
safe.
thanks so much. Have a great weekend, everybody. And stay safe, please. Remember to mask up, wash your hands. And if you're not vaccinated, consider being vaccinated. It's your choice.
I will.
And don't forget to social distance, the most important part as well. All right?
Right.
I
Okay.
thought that it was very good and really child appropriate. You really came down to the level of the children, and I appreciate that a whole lot.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Yeah, the police and
all the stories.
And even the Superman.
You're able to understand it.
Yes, you did a great job. Tremendous job.
Thank you so
much.
Everybody.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye,
Have a good night,
everyone.
everyone.
Have a good night.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.